Kestrel Station hovered in geosynchronous orbit over what remained of the Pacific. Once a symbol of Earth's rebirth after the collapse, now it was just a place people passed through, a way station for technicians, smugglers, and repair crews with nowhere else to go. It was quiet in the observation deck until the sky cracked. Not metaphorically, literally. A deep, thunderless groan echoed through the station's structure. The artificial gravity shivered. And then, in the black beyond the viewport, something tore. It started as a thin silver line across the horizon, like someone had scratched a mirror with a diamond blade. Then it widened, slowly at first, until the stars themselves seemed to bend and break around the wound. Shards of light hovered, spinning like dying embers. The sky, once a blanket of peace, was now a fractured canvas bleeding wrongness. At first, no one moved, not even Tamsin. She stood at the glass, coffee forgotten in her hand, watching the rupture stretch like a scar over Earth's upper atmosphere. Her reflection looked pale and tired, but her eyes were locked, staring into something beyond comprehension. Behind her, static buzzed across the internal comm. Control to Tamsin Vale. You seeing this? She didn't answer. The crack wasn't just visual. It was loud, not in sound but in memory. Thoughts scrambled. Time slipped. For a heartbeat, she was 6 again, lying on her childhood roof watching a meteor shower with her brother. Then a blink later, she was 80 and alone in a hospital bed. Then it stopped. Not the fracture, the visions. She blinked. The crack was still there. So was her coffee. Yeah, she finally said, voice low. I see it. Tamsin stepped off the dropship as it hissed open onto the scorched plains of old Nevada. The fracture was visible even in daylight, an unnatural tear in the heavens like a seam holding reality together with borrowed thread. Every few seconds the crack pulsed, shimmering like oil over water. Time near it bent in strange ways. Everyone felt it. The mobile science outpost had been erected in haste, half-tense, sensor pylons, and a dozen drones drifting overhead. The ground was cracked, not from tectonics, but from whatever was leaking downward. Grass grew in strange geometric patterns. Winds spun in hexagonal spirals. Birds flew in loops and never landed. You made good time, said the man, waiting at the edge of the landing pad. He was older now, but Tamsin recognized Elias Vorn from their days in orbital reconstruction. Grayer, slower, but still with that calm, unshakable focus, like a man who'd already seen the worst and just wanted the data. How long has it been doing that? She asked, nodding to the sky. 17 hours, 13 minutes. He passed her a visor tablet, already buzzing with readings. Radiation levels fluctuate every time it pulses. We think it's leaking light from alternate time streams. Tamsin scrolled through the visuals, images captured by drone. Some showed forests where desert should be. Others had inverted gravity. One frame showed a blurred image of herself standing in a field wearing a red coat she didn't own. You're running stabilization protocols? That's the problem. Nothing works. Every time we try to anchor the perimeter, it resets, as if the laws of physics are rewriting themselves in real time. Tamsin looked up again. The sky had stopped being beautiful. It was now a question with no answer. And answers were what she feared most. The perimeter trembled again. Not the ground, the air itself. It was evening now, or what passed for it under the fractured sky. One moment the light was golden, the next it faded to dull steel, then returned to blue like someone was flipping channels through seasons. Drones sputtered overhead, their stabilizers struggling with the shifting pressure zones. Inside the lab tent, Tamsin stared at the latest sensor reading. It wasn't electromagnetic, it wasn't thermal, it wasn't anything they could classify. It was a signal, but not broadcast, printed. Somehow the sky was bleeding information. Lines of distorted code appeared in the interference, embedded within the fluctuations of light and gravity. When processed through the translation filters, the message didn't resolve into data. It resolved into language. Human. Not perfect, fragmented, stammered, like something learning to speak again. He was the last. No, he was first. Don't return, don't return, don't retoot. We tried to forget, but the sky remembers. Tamsin backed away from the screen. It's not a rupture, she muttered. It's a message. Vorn stood behind her, arms folded. His face was unreadable as always. So someone, or something, is talking to us, he said. No. She shook her head. They're talking to the crack. We're just in the way. She looked outside again. In the distance, one of the drones fell from the sky and froze mid-air just before hitting the ground. It stayed there, floating, dead weight held aloft by physics, no longer interested in behaving. Tamsin whispered the question none of them wanted to ask out loud. What if the sky's trying to remember us? The camp went silent at 3:17 UTC. No alarms, no sudden breach, just silence. Every electronic device froze. The air hung still. A few drops of rain hovered mid-fall and never reached the ground. Wind curled in upon itself, looping endlessly without pushing anything forward. Tamsin stepped outside, visor light flickering erratically, trying not to breathe too loudly. And then he walked out of the fracture. One step, then another. He was human, that much was clear. Barefoot, wearing scorched clothing from a time that didn't match this one. A long coat with torn fabric, one sleeve missing. Dust caked into every crease. His face was hollowed by time and something else. Something wrong. Eyes like broken mirrors reflecting places that didn't exist. He didn't speak at first, just stood there swaying slightly. The crack in the sky pulsed behind him like a heartbeat trying to find its rhythm. Vorn whispered, Tamsin, stay back. But she took a step forward. She knew him, somehow, like a half-forgotten dream, like a face glimpsed in a memory that isn't yours. Who are you? She asked. He tilted his head, then blinked, hard, as if adjusting. You're early, he said, voice raw and distant. You weren't supposed to be here yet. She felt the ground shift beneath that sentence. Do you remember your name? She asked. He looked toward the crack, then back at her. I remember the end, he said, and I remember that I came back to stop it. Then without warning, he collapsed, just as reality seemed to breathe again. The medical tent wasn't equipped for anomalies. It could treat radiation burns, plasma wounds, neuroshock, but not people who had clearly stepped through a dimensional fault line. Tamsin hovered near the cot, watching as the stranger slept. He hadn't stirred once since collapsing. His vitals were normal, too normal. The blood sample told a different story. Not a match to any known genome on Earth, but it wasn't alien either. It was human, just from a different version. Half the markers were extinct, the other half hadn't evolved yet. Tamsin stared at the analysis, hands trembling. Vorn stood behind her again, silent, watching over her shoulder. He's from a different timeline, she said, or a splinter of one. Vorn crossed his arms. And he came through the sky, through that thing. She nodded, and he knew me. That last part stuck in her chest like glass. The man had called her name, had spoken like they were once allies, maybe even friends. Someone from a version of herself that had already lived through what was coming. She turned back to the cot. He was awake, eyes locked on hers. The crack isn't a tear, he said softly. It's a scar. Tamsin stepped forward, slowly. A scar from what? He exhaled. From when we tried to rewrite the end. Outside the tent, the sky pulsed again. And this time, for the briefest second, the world forgot what color was. The power flickered again, and with it, the holographic map of the sky fracture wavered. What had once been a linear break had now become something else entirely, an expanding spiral of distortion. The map showed gravitational currents curving like whirlpools, light dragging behind in long streaks of amber and violet. It wasn't just growing. It was remembering and reshaping. The man, who still refused to give his name, stood now watching the map beside Tamsin. He moved like someone who had walked too far through too many lifetimes. Quiet, heavy. "We built a machine," he said finally. "It was meant to undo one mistake. Just one. A single change to the past to prevent the collapse." Tamsin didn't speak. She let him keep going. "It worked for about 11 minutes. He smiled bitterly. Then time noticed. And time doesn't like being edited. He pointed to the spiraling map. "That's not a hole. That's a memory loop unraveling. Every attempt to fix the past fed the fracture, until it started leaking moments, lives, whole histories. And you came back to stop it?" Bourne asked from the edge of the tent. The man nodded once. "The last reset ended with Earth folded in on itself, like paper soaked in oil." He looked at Tamsin now directly. "But your version, always reaches this point, always comes close." She swallowed hard. "Close to what?" "Making the same mistake." The tent went silent again as the fracture pulsed. This time with a sound, a low chiming tone like bells being struck underwater. Tamsin stared at the data, jaw tightening. "Then let's try not to repeat it." The man stepped closer, gently placed a device on the table. Ancient, scorched, familiar. "You don't have to start over," he said. "You just have to remember." Outside, the first drone in hours returned. Only its footage showed no camp, no sky, just dust, and a message. "Run memory line 0, initiating fail-safe protocol, Skyfold." The ground was humming now, not in vibration, but in memory. Beneath their boots, the earth remembered being glass. The clouds overhead flickered between decades. Somewhere above them, stars blinked in Morse, spelling out dates that hadn't happened yet. Inside the lab tent, Tamsin inserted the worn device into the primary uplink. "This is a bad idea," Bourne muttered, arms crossed tightly. "We're out of good ones." She tapped in the last sequence, fingers trembling. "And if he's right, then this is the only one that doesn't end with Earth folding like wet origami." The man who came through the fracture stood behind her, silent, watching, waiting. He hadn't given them a name, but he didn't need to. Tamsin had already guessed. The system lit up. The device, his device, began to spin, its interface pulsing in deep blue, then white, then a shade of violet the human eye wasn't built to comprehend. "Fail-safe protocol recognized." "Confirm?" Tamsin hesitated. "What happens if we're wrong?" Bourne asked. The man answered for her. "Then the sky finishes what it started." She tapped confirm. The world flinched. The fracture above them shrank, but not like a closing wound. It folded, bent back into itself like a map being redrawn by unseen hands. Lightning rippled across the upper stratosphere as time, raw and unwilling, snapped taut like a pulled wire. Everything paused. The birds that had been flying in loops vanished. The wind stopped curling. The warped colors bled back into real ones. And for the first time in 23 hours, the sky was just sky. The camp exhaled in one ragged breath. The stranger, older, slower now, smiled faintly. One version finally got it right. Tamsin turned to him. "Will you disappear now?" He gave her a tired look. "I don't think so." He glanced at the horizon. "I think I'm supposed to stay. Help you remember what the others forgot." She nodded slowly, then smiled. Not because it was over, but because maybe for the first time in 100 broken timelines, they'd stopped it from breaking again.